You know what's funny about becoming a billionaire? Most people think it's about having one really, really good idea, like inventing the iPhone or discovering oil in your backyard. But sometimes it's about having 100 pretty good ideas and somehow convincing the world that you're the person who should be in charge of all of them. Today, we're talking about Sean Carter. You probably know him as Jay-Z. And yes, before you ask, we're going to talk about how a kid from Brooklyn who once sold CDs out of his car became wealthier than some small nations. But this isn't your typical rags to riches story. This is more like rags to riches to champagne company to art collection to streaming service to, well, you get the idea. The beginning. Let's rewind to 1996. Sean Carter had a problem. He was a talented rapper, sure, but every record label in New York had already passed on him. Now, most people would take that rejection and maybe try a different career, accounting perhaps, or something sensible. But here's where our story gets interesting. Instead of giving up, Jay-Z did something that sounds obvious in hindsight, but was actually kind of wild at the time. He thought, if nobody wants to give me a record deal, I'll just create my own record label. Which is a bit like being rejected from every restaurant in town and deciding to open your own 5-star establishment with no cooking experience. He scraped together money, partnered with Damon Dash and Kareem Burke, and they launched Rockefeller Records out of an office that was, and I'm paraphrasing here, not exactly palatial. His debut album, Reasonable Doubt, came out that same year. It sold decently, nothing earth-shattering, but here's the thing about that album. People who knew hip-hop recognized they were hearing something special. The album aged like fine wine, which is appropriate because Jay-Z would later get really into the wine business, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The Blueprint. Fast forward through the late 90s and early 2000s, Jay-Z wasn't just making music anymore. He was making moves, album after album, each one selling millions. Volume 2, Hard Knock Life, goes 5 times platinum. The Blueprint becomes, well, a blueprint for how to make a hip-hop album. The man couldn't stop releasing hits if he tried. But here's where Jay-Z started showing us something different. While other rappers were focused purely on their music careers, he was looking around thinking, what else can I do? And the answer, apparently, was pretty much everything. In 1999, he co-founded Rocawear, a clothing line. Now, you might think, sure, another celebrity clothing line, how original, except this one actually made money, like serious money. By the mid-2000s, Rocawear was generating over $700 million in annual revenue. That's not a typo, $700 million from t-shirts and jeans. He sold it in 2007 for $204 million, which brings us to an important lesson in the Jay-Z business philosophy: know when to cash out. While other celebrities were holding on to their brands like precious babies, Jay-Z understood that sometimes the smartest move is to take the money and run. Well, not run exactly, more like casually walk toward the next business opportunity. The mogul emerges. Around this time, Jay-Z started doing something that seemed unusual. He started collecting businesses the way some people collect stamps, except these stamps were worth millions of dollars and came with quarterly earnings reports. In 2004, he became president of Def Jam Recordings. Important job, sure, but he left after 3 years. Why? Because staying in one place apparently wasn't part of the plan. The plan seemed to be get in, learn everything you can, add value, then move on to something bigger. Then came the sports bars. In 2003, he partnered with the 40/40 Club, not just as a celebrity investor who shows up for photo ops, but as someone actually involved in building a chain of upscale sports lounges, because apparently running a record label and clothing company left him with too much free time. But the real plot twist came with the beverages. First, there was a partnership with Budweiser. Then, in a move that confused absolutely everyone, Jay-Z became part owner of the New Jersey Nets basketball team in 2004. Now, owning a tiny percentage of a basketball team isn't exactly a gold mine. His share was reportedly less than 1%. But here's the clever part. It gave him credibility in the sports world, which would come in handy later. Because in 2013, he launched Roc Nation Sports, a sports management agency. See what he did there? Buy into a team, learn the industry from the inside, then start representing the players. That's not just business sense. That's playing three-dimensional chess while everyone else is playing checkers. The champagne moment. Let's talk about champagne. Specifically, let's talk about Armand de Brignac, which you might know as that gold bottle Jay-Z is always mentioning in his songs. This is where the strategy gets really interesting. Jay-Z didn't just invest in this champagne brand in 2006. He weaponized his own lifestyle as marketing. Every music video, every public appearance, every lyric that mentioned the brand was essentially a commercial. Except it wasn't a commercial, it was just him living his life, which made it more effective than any commercial could ever be. The champagne industry establishment probably chuckled at first. A rapper selling luxury champagne? How adorable! Except then it started working. Really working. The brand became synonymous with celebration and luxury. In 2014, he bought the entire company outright. Then in 2021, he sold half of it to LVMH, the luxury conglomerate, in a deal reportedly worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the pattern with Jay-Z. He doesn't just endorse products, he becomes the product, then he owns the product, then he sells the product for enormous profit. Rinse and repeat. The streaming wars. Now we come to 2015 and perhaps the most ambitious, most criticized, and most fascinating piece of the empire, Tidal. When Jay-Z acquired the streaming service Aspire and relaunched it as Tidal, music critics and tech journalists lined up to explain why this was going to fail spectacularly. A music streaming service in a world where Spotify and Apple Music already existed, owned by musicians who promised to pay artists better. It sounded idealistic at best, delusional at worst. And for a while, it looked like the critics might be right. Tidal struggled to gain subscribers. There were public relations stumbles. People joked about it online. But Jay-Z kept investing, kept refining, kept adding exclusive content. Then in 2021, Jack Dorsey's company, Square, acquired a majority stake in Tidal for $297 million. Suddenly, the people who had been laughing weren't laughing anymore. Once again, Jay-Z had turned skepticism into profit. The billion-dollar question. So when did Jay-Z actually become a billionaire? Well, that depends on who's counting and what they're counting. Forbes declared him hip-hop's first billionaire in 2019, but Jay-Z himself disputes the methodology. He thinks he got there earlier, which is a very billionaire thing to argue about, honestly. Here's what we know about the empire as it stands today. There's the music catalog, which is worth a substantial amount on its own. There's the streaming service stake. There's the champagne money. There's the cognac brand Doucet, where he owns a significant share. There's the cannabis company. There's the art collection, which reportedly includes works by Jean-Michel Basquiat worth tens of millions of dollars. There's the real estate portfolio. And then there's Roc Nation, his entertainment company that manages everyone from Rihanna to athletes to other entertainment properties. It's less a company and more like a small empire within the empire. So what's the actual secret here? How did a kid from the Marcy Projects in Brooklyn end up with a business empire that spans music, fashion, sports, beverages, technology, and art? Well, here's the thing that makes Jay-Z different from a lot of celebrity entrepreneurs. He doesn't just slap his name on things and hope for the best. He actually seems to understand the businesses he gets into. He learns the industry, identifies inefficiencies or opportunities, then positions himself right in the middle of where the money flows. It's also about timing. He gets into industries just before they explode, or sometimes just as everyone else thinks they're dying. Streaming music seemed like a bad bet in 2015, but 5 years later, it's how everyone consumes music. And perhaps most importantly, he's willing to fail publicly. Tidal could have been a disaster. Some of his ventures haven't worked out, but he keeps moving, keeps evolving, keeps finding the next opportunity. The empire isn't just about accumulating wealth. It's about building something that changes how entire industries work. It's about going from selling CDs out of your trunk to having a seat at the table where billion-dollar deals get made. Not bad for someone every record label in New York passed on. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how Jay-Z built his empire, there are more celebrity empire stories coming soon. What business mogul should we cover next? Let us know in the comments.